Right. Susan?
Okay. All right. In many senses, what I'm about to say is a bit of a rant. And I feel like I'm stating the obvious compared to a lot of the reasonable things, but I'm going to do it anyway. Essentially, for anti-capitalists, and for that matter, anybody with a passing interest in reality, the impact of the introduction of austerity measures was obvious, as expected. These measures have led to increased unemployment, impoverishment of the poor and the working class, and the destruction of public services, rather than leading to increased economic growth driven by the rather than leading to increased economic growth driven by the impoverishment of the poor and the working class. The UK, as we know, has fallen officially into recession, that is 2 quarters of negative growth rates. Now, the use of austerity throughout Europe has also led to declining growth, increasing unemployment, especially among women and young, continued attacks on real wages. Now, when I say continued, I mean this is the traditional policy because Keynes believed that workers could not stand or would not stand for cuts in money wages. Now, Keynes's argument is predicated upon a strong working class movement and strong trade unions. In the absence of this, and international capital has been working on this, just this point, literally, since the 1970s, we are now facing what is a direct attack on the money wage. Now, there is no evidence that the private sector is willing and able to take up the slack created by the attack on the public sector and the provision of services done by the social welfare state. So, what's going on? Essentially, the policies we are witnessing are not simply proof of neoliberalism's unchallenged sway, but also the unsustainability of these policies themselves. If the longer-term aim is to destroy any possibility for defying the reign of unbridled capital concentration, okay, the policies are also desperate attempts to shore up an ideology which has absolutely no correlation with the real economy, even in the context of the capitalist economy. Okay, now, to understand what's happening in the UK, and I think in the rest of the countries that are being subjected to austerity measures driven by neoliberal economics, we essentially need to understand ideology, okay? I'm going to start with an example. On the day in which it was announced that the UK fell into the double-dip recession, the BBC was going around interviewing people. And one of these people was a venture capitalist who I believe was a man named John Moulton. Now, he said, and it's a loose quote, so I'm paraphrasing. He basically said it's only the private sector that creates economic growth. If we want growth, we need to cut the state sector even further and leave it to the private sector to bring this country forwards. Continue cutting taxes on corporations even more, make investment worthwhile, and we will revive the economy. No one, not one single person, okay, on the BBC challenged the absurdity of this statement. Not one of them. Okay? No one even thought of mentioning the New Deal in the US. It never happened. The social democratic policies throughout Europe, never happened. No one pointed out that the state sector not only provided the incomes, which provided demand for goods and services produced in the system, and also the jobs that provided the labor to rebuild the country following the war, okay, and to develop its infrastructure, and that this is what sustained economic growth historically in the post-war period. Okay, not one person was able to challenge this statement. So they are so completely out of touch with history, and in my opinion, with reality. Now, what's happening is that the ideology of neoliberalism, which is literally an ideology, is accepted and advanced as truth, and no one will even, oh, there's nothing else we can do. Of course there are other things we can do. I mean, this is an absurd statement, even in the context of economic reformist policies. Now, what's most salient is that the impact of these policies on the poor and the working classes has been incredible. The neoliberal ideology underlying the destruction of the public sector, the impoverishment of the working class to bolster profitability, has impacted the lives of the majority of people in these countries, and is leading as well to rising wealth and income inequality and impoverishment as a deliberate policy. Okay? Now, we have to make no mistake about this. This is deliberate, it's not a byproduct of doing this deliberately, and it's based solely upon ideological arguments. Now, these policies have been instituted following a long period of the weakening of trade unions and other organs of the working class, and the left itself Now, they think, literally, that we have no way of a fight back against the policies that, so what, these policies, they proceeded to then consolidate these policies much further than was initially started in the 70s, basically now. And they're using policies that were honed in the capitalist periphery to see, which they have used against Argentina, which they've used against throughout most of the periphery, as well as, some formerly emergent economies that have now sunk back into collapsed economies. Now, literally, if you want, the chickens have come home to roost against the working classes of the advanced capitalist world. Now, the point that we're seeing is that the situation, in many senses, is far worse than is expected by the government and economic specialists. And you start to wonder what projections they were using, because this was obvious what was going to happen by all those that were not deluded by the fantasies of neoliberals. Okay? We're witnessing a problem that is not only cyclical, in the sense that it was caused by the crash of 2008, but it's a structural problem. And that unemployment is not only related to the crash, the nature in which capitalist profit-making criteria and decision-making has led to a structural unemployment problem. Now, what we're seeing is on the part of the policies of government is a consolidation of the attempt to eliminate the post-war consensus and replace it with a flexible labor market based upon a low-wage economy and increased exploitation so as to sustain profitability in the advanced capital world in the face of profitability falling in that part of the capitalist, in the advanced capitalist world. Now, this will have long-term implications for people living here, okay? And I'm talking specifically in the advanced capitalist countries, because decreased incomes, no longer bolstered by access to easy but expensive credit, mean that consumption of workers is being deliberately decreased. Now, not in the way that we want, because, let's shift the patterns of consumption. We're literally decreasing consumption as well. And this will certainly have an impact on the possibility of realization of surplus value or surplus products contained in the goods that are sold in the advanced capitalist world. Now, in the absence of sustained increases in income in the emergent economies, profitability in the system as a whole is certainly going to fall. And this is the point that nobody's talking about. Now, I'm just going to make a very short summation of the primary effects of austerity measures. I have all the stats, but I don't think people want to sit there and listen to me go on about them. But essentially, the austerity measures have had the following primary effects. As we know, public sector job losses not being matched by increased job creation in the private sector. And the attack on the public sector essentially has a twofold purpose. First of all, it's the privatization of the service sector to enable the private sector to have another potential area of profitability. It's a destruction of the last bastion of trade union power to consolidate the lowering of wages, benefits, and regulations throughout the country, and to undercut whatever power unions and the organs of the working class still maintain after the destruction of the industrial and manufacturing base of the advanced capitalist world. Now, additionally, the second major thing that we're seeing, of course, is rising general unemployment, especially among full-time workers. We're seeing a structural transition in the workforce towards a low-wage workforce based upon part-time work, self-employment through subcontracting, and informal sector work. Now, so far, and we haven't even seen the impact of the austerity measures yet, but we know that 110,000 public sector workers have lost their job since last March, and it's been predicted by the Institute for Fiscal Studies that the numbers may rise to as high as 710,000. So while David Cameron talks about the numbers of jobs being provided by the finance sector, they're basically talking about putting 710,000 people out of work. And somehow, again, nobody seems to want to talk about this. Now, in terms of the latest employment statistics, which were released on April 18th, basically said that between September to November and December to February, unemployment and economic activity fell. Now, on the other hand, employment increased. However, and this is a major however, the employment increase was in part-time employment, because the numbers of full-time employees actually fell. Now, in terms of the employment rate, it was up 0.1% on the quarter, and that's in terms of the number of people in employment age 16 and over. So it increased by 53,000 on the quarter, but it actually fell by 57,000 on the year. Okay, this is the Office of National Statistics. I am not pulling it out of anywhere else. And it fell to reach 21.23 million. Okay, the number of employees and self-employed people who are working part-time because they could not find a full-time job increased by 89,000 on the quarter, all right, to reach 1.44 million. And this is the highest figure since compatible records began in 1992. Okay, in terms of the unemployment rate, they say that it was up 0.1 on the quarter, but from what I'm seeing from looking at all my data, it was basically 8.3 in August. It's now still 8.3. The number of unemployed people, they say, fell by 35,000 to reach 2.65 million. I have in basically August 2.62 million. So I'm not saying anything. They're saying it's falling. I'm seeing something different, and it's their own statistics I'm comparing. 5 minutes. Okay. I'm going to stop with those. Now, the other point that we're seeing, and this is very important, is the falling incomes and increasing poverty. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, again, we have the biggest fall in median household income since the 70s. Rising costs, rising energy bills, or rising food prices are undercutting household income. Now, we know part of this is due to the increased VAT. Part of this is due to increased prices as well due to inflation. And a part of it is, of course, people taking advantage of the possibility they can do it. There are rising numbers of people using food banks to cover fallen income due to benefit cuts. Okay, and this is especially the case for young people that are experiencing high rates of unemployment. And the latest thing, which has been done really well by The Guardian, so I'm only going to talk about that very quickly, very, very quickly, is the rising rents, and that to contribute to this impoverishment, we see rents rising spectacularly throughout London. And the introduction of the cap on benefits, which even hasn't come into play completely, is basically already having a twofold economic effect. We know that the purpose of it is to clear the poor out of from the center of London. Now, the amount of housing benefits is insufficient to enable people to stay in the center. We also are seeing rising rents. So these are meaning that the areas where they could afford, okay, further out are becoming increasingly out of reach. Additional rental agencies are refusing to rent places if housing benefits are used to cover all or part of the rent. Now, I actually saw this in Manor Park because I was walking with my friend, and they actually had on the thing, if you are on housing benefits, we will not rent to you. And you're like, okay. The insufficient public housing means that there's already long waiting lists. People being thrown to the center are being added to the list. So we're seeing unscrupulous landlords breaking up houses and renting out rooms at exorbitant costs. Slums are renting out beds and sheds, which even the government has recognized as a rising problem. And I just recently that tenants are being evicted to provide housing for the Olympic visitors at exorbitant rates. We find councils trying to unload the poor on council housing waiting lists outside of London. And, people have referred to this as social cleansing, but it's not social cleansing. What it is class cleansing. Increasingly, it's becoming evident that the vast majority of people who are facing this are people of color, low mothers, poor families. It's the poor that are being thrown out. It's not social. It's a class thing. And it's like, unless class has become social, okay, fine. Now, in terms of social costs, evictions to the center of London will remove children from schools. It's going to break up community support groups and undermine an extended family. And that usually provides backup for childcare and caring for the sick and elderly. Again, we're seeing a shift of social responsibility from the state onto the backs of women already burdened by job loss, income loss, and now increasing exploitation of work. And just quick, 2 seconds? Can I have 2 seconds? Okay. Benefits are falling harder on women than men. The concentration of women in part-time work historically, and also in the state sector, which is, of course, women who work primarily in the state sector. These are the people who are facing the brunt of job cuts, and so also the fact that we have women concentrated in part-time work because they have child care responsibilities, they have responsibilities for the extended family, including elderly and sick people. This leaves them dependent upon government benefits, which are facing cuts. Okay, so the additional problems is that we're seeing cuts in benefits to services like protection for victims of sexual, domestic, and other forms of violence, disability benefits and pensions, and to these cuts in benefits that were specifically geared for women, maternity benefits, pregnancy benefits. Then the cuts to the children's services and benefits, including child tax credits, blah, blah, blah. Now, The government itself has admitted that 60% of customers who are likely to have benefit reduced by the cap to be single females, but only 3% to be single men. Most of the single parent women affected are likely lone parents, because we expect the vast majority of households affected by policies, that's 90%, to have children. 60% of these that are capped are single women. Single women form 40% of the overall benefit population, and this is from the DWP's Housing Benefit Cap Equality Impact Assessment. Okay? So, I don't even have to say anymore. And finally, just the last thing is obviously the increased exploitation of workers. I have a theoretical explanation and discussion of it, but I have no time to do that, so I'll have to wait for another time.
For the discussion itself. Well, I'll throw it open for questions and contributions, right? Yes?
Awesome. You said that there should be, well, let me backtrack. I think that the constitutional provision establishing the euro is terrible, and the euro doesn't deserve to live. But you make the point that the treaties should be
Default.
well, they should be renegotiated, but that nobody should leave the euro. Now, the pressure to renegotiate can only come, it seems to me, out of the threat, at least, a very credible threat to leave the euro. And of course, there's the position of Germany, chiefly, to contend with. I don't really